drawing on insights from groups like AAO-IFI.
Yes, some leading organizations in the field.
Our goal, to give you the inside scoop, the shortcut really, to understanding the core principles, the different kinds of contracts, and how they actually work under Islamic law.
It's quite an intricate subject, but very relevant.
Definitely. Okay, let's dig in. So when we talk about Islamic franchise contracts, what exactly are we defining here? It probably sounds a bit different from, your typical high street franchise.
It does, yeah. At its core, a franchise in this specific context is the act of granting another party the right to exploit something or to construct something or even just to manage it.
Okay, exploit, construct, manage.
Right. And this right is granted by whoever holds it in exchange for some kind of agreed-upon payment or consideration.
And what makes it Islamic? Is it just allowed?
Well, that's the key. The standard makes it very clear. These contracts are permissible if they don't contradict any Sharia rulings. That's the baseline.
So the terms, conditions, everything has to align.
Exactly. The whole structure. And interestingly, there's no objection to, say, the state regulating the procedures, maybe imposing fees, as long as those practices themselves are free from Sharia prohibitions, things like interest or excessive uncertainty.
Right, avoiding things like riba and gharar.
Precisely. That ethical alignment is fundamental.
So beyond just avoiding prohibitions, what are the sort of guiding principles when a franchise is actually granted?
Good question. The standard really emphasizes three key things: ensuring fairness, providing equality of opportunity for those who might want the franchise, and this is critical, achieving the public interest.
Public interest, that seems like a major focus.
It absolutely is. It's woven throughout the standard. It's about making sure the arrangement benefits the community or the public good, not just the parties involved.
That really sets a different tone. Okay, before we get into the specific types, does this standard cover all kinds of franchises? What's the scope here?
Good clarification. No, it's quite specific. This Sharia standard focuses on the religious rulings for exploitation, construction, and management franchise contracts.
Just those three?
Yes, and how institutions apply them. It explicitly doesn't cover general legal rights associated with franchising in a broader sense, or what you might think of as typical licensing franchises.
Like grand licensing for a fast food chain or something.
Exactly, that kind of thing. This standard is more focused on these specific operational or resource-based franchises, often involving the state or public assets.
Got it. Okay, so we have the foundation. Let's unpack these types then, starting with exploitation franchises. What does that involve?
Right. Exploitation franchise contracts, uqud imtiyaz al-istial. These are often agreements between a state, maybe a government, and a person or a company.
Okay.
And they grant the franchise the exclusive right to exploit resources. Think minerals, oil, water, and, produce them, all in exchange for some form of payment.
Sounds like a pretty significant deal. Are there, specific steps to get one? A process?
Yes, there's often a systematic process, although the state can sometimes grant the franchise directly, but typically it might involve stages.
Like what?
Well, first, maybe a reconnaissance license. You might need this just to look around and do some initial surveys. It usually requires a fee, but it doesn't give you exclusive rights or permission to drill. It's just preliminary.
Just scouting, basically.
Exactly. Then you might need an exploration license. This could also need a fee and might grant an exclusive right for exploration in a specific area. It allows for more serious work, like test drilling.
Okay, getting more serious.
Right. And then obtaining the exploitation franchise itself. If you actually discover something valuable during exploration, you typically get the exclusive right to exploit it.
Unless the license says otherwise.
Correct. But if the exploration term ends and you haven't found anything, well, you lose that right.
Makes sense. So how does Sharia view these? What's the classification?
Often they can be classified as jala.
Jala. Remind me.
It's essentially a contract for a reward for achieving a specific task or result, like offering a reward for finding a lost item.
Ah, right. A reward for a specific outcome.
Precisely. So here, the state is like the jadil, the one offering the reward. The institution or company is the amil, the worker doing the exploration and exploitation. And the jewel, the reward, is the payment, maybe a share of the resources found.
So the reward is tied to success.
Often, yes, especially when the state initiates the request. It aligns incentives nicely, particularly given the uncertainty of exploration.
That makes sense. Now, where can these apply? Does land ownership matter?
Oh, absolutely crucial point. It depends on the jurisprudential view on mineral ownership.
How so?
Well, if the view is that minerals belong to the state, then these contracts can basically apply to any type of land.
Okay, that's straightforward.
But if the view is that minerals are owned by the landowner, then certain lands are excluded.
As such.
Privately owned lands, obviously.
Uh-huh.
Also, Mawat lands, barren lands that someone has reclaimed and revived according to specific Sharia conditions, and lands already granted as concessions. So ownership really matters.
Right. So once you have this exploitation franchise, what are the obligations? What do you have to do?
Well, you get the exclusive right to do everything necessary for the exploitation, setting up facilities, transport networks, whatever is needed.
Okay.
But a key obligation is perseverance. You have to keep the exploitation activity going according to the agreement or, customary practice.
You can't just sit on the rights.
Exactly. If activity stops without a good reason, you get a grace period to restart. But if you still don't persevere, the state can actually terminate the franchise. Public interest again, you see.
Always comes back to that. What about pricing and the products themselves?
The state has the right to sort of predetermine how the franchise manages their share of the product and the payment they get, again, with public interest as the guide.
Okay.
And the state can also stipulate a right of first refusal, basically. The right to buy the franchisee's share of the product first at the same price offered to others. That's in addition to the state's own designated share.
So the state maintains significant control. And how do these contracts end?
Several ways. Mutual agreement, obviously. The term expiring, breach of conditions by the franchisee is a big one, or simply if the resource runs out.
And if the franchise breaches the contract?
Then compensation for actual damages might be required if the contract is terminated early because of their actions.
Okay, that covers exploitation. Let's move to the next type. Construction franchise contracts. How are these different?
Right. Construction franchises or Imtiaz al-Insha. These are about establishing a project, often public facilities like a bridge, a road, a power plant, built to specific standards.
So building infrastructure mainly.
Often, yes. And what's interesting is the variety of forms they can take regarding ownership and benefit.
Such as?
Well, one form, the project is built on state land, but the franchise owns the project itself and benefits from it for a set period.
Okay, franchise owns it temporarily.
Another form,
Yeah?
built on state land, the state owns the project from the start, but the franchisee gets to benefit from operating it for a period before handing it over completely. Maybe like a build-operate transfer model sometimes.
Oh,
Or it could be built on state land, owned by the state, but both the state and the franchisee share in the benefits generated.
different models for different needs.
Exactly. And crucially, in all these, the franchise usually gives the holder the right to collect fees or charges for the public services the project provides. That's how they recoup their investment.
Right, charging tolls on a bridge they built, for example.
Precisely.
So how do these fit into Sharia classifications? It seems potentially complex.
It can be, because it combines the building aspect with the right to benefit over time.
So what are the possibilities?
It might be seen as an istisna contract. That's like a commissioning or manufacturing contract.
Commissioning the construction.
Yes. The franchisee is obligated to do the work, provide materials, and the price paid to them isn't cash up front, but the right to benefit from the project later, often on land they lease from the state.
So the benefit is the payment.
In a sense, yes. Or it could be framed as an ijara, a lease. Maybe the construction itself is considered the rent paid in advance for the land or the right to operate.
Interesting.
There's also a discussion about the consideration. It could be istisna for building and exploitation, with the price being a fixed amount, but the project itself stays with the holder as a kind of guarantee or security until that price is effectively received through the benefits.
That's quite sophisticated.
It allows for flexibility in structuring these large, long-term projects within Sharia guidelines.
Okay, and the last type, management franchise contracts. What's the focus here?
Management franchises. Uqud Imtiaz al-Idara. These are simpler in concept. The state grants another party the right to simply manage existing public facilities or installations.
So not building or exploiting, just running things.
Exactly. Running a public utility, managing a water treatment plant, operating a public transport system, maybe. Always for a fee and always aiming for the public interest.
And the Sharia classification here, does it depend on the payment?
Yes, the compensation structure is key. If the payment is a fixed amount or maybe a percentage of total revenue, it's generally considered an ijara, a lease contract for services, basically.
Straightforward lease of management services.
Right. The state is leasing the management function, and the state can still charge an initial granting fee on top of the regular payments.
Okay. What if the payment isn't fixed?
Well, if the consideration is a percentage of the actual profits, then it's often classified as a mudaraba.
A profit-sharing partnership.
Correct. The state provides the asset or facility, the franchisee provides the management expertise and effort, and they share the resulting profit according to an agreed ratio.
And what about the franchisee's relationship with the public, the users?
That interaction, say charging users for the service, could itself be an ijara, leasing the service, or even a sale, depending on what's being provided.
Makes sense. What are the key operational points for these management contracts? Termination, pricing.
Good points. Termination can happen if the term expires, if conditions are violated, obligations aren't met, or if the franchisee just abandons the project.
But what about the public service?
Crucial caveat. Any termination must include procedures to ensure that service delivery to the public is not disrupted. That continuity is paramount.
Public interest again.
Always. For service pricing, the granting entity, usually the state, has the right to set and adjust prices to ensure fairness and protect the public interest. They don't want the franchisee exploiting the public.
And oversight.
Absolutely. Compliance monitoring is built in. The state has the right to monitor and inspect operations, directly or via an agent, to make sure all conditions are being met. And they can impose penalties for breaches.
So strong oversight mechanisms.
Definitely needed when public services are involved.
Okay, we've got the three types laid out. Now, how do actual institutions, especially Islamic financial institutions, get involved? How do they apply these concepts, particularly for the bigger ones like exploitation and construction?
Right. This is where the financial structuring comes in. Institutions can engage directly with the state, or they might be an intermediary between the state and the actual operator.
Okay, so what models do they use for, say, exploitation franchises?
Several common ones. We mentioned Jala. An institution might structure it that way or use a parallel Jala where they commission the work from someone else. Their reward is often a specified share of the product.
Tied to the output.
Yes. Or it could be profit sharing. The state provides the land, the institution provides capital and perhaps expertise, and they share the profits.
A partnership model.
Exactly. Another strong partnership model is musharaka. This could be a fixed partnership where the institution contributes capital and stays in for the duration.
All right.
Or, quite commonly, a diminishing partnership, diminishing musharaka. Here, the institution provides capital initially, co-owning the venture, but commits to gradually selling its share over time to the other party, like the state or the operator.
So the institution eventually exits, leaving the other party with full ownership.
Precisely. It's a very popular financing structure in Islamic finance for long-term assets.
Okay, and what about for construction franchises? Similar models?
Similar principles adapted for construction. Istisna is key here, often with parallel istisna. The state might commission the project from the institution, istisna, and the institution might then commission the actual construction work from a contractor, parallel istisna.
So managing the construction contract.
Yes. The price is related to the construction cost, often paid in stages. Ijara models are also used, maybe Ijara Mutahi bil Tamlik, a lease, ending in ownership.
How does that work?
The state might lease land to the institution to build on. Then the completed project is leased back to the state, with lease payment structured so that ownership transfers to the state at the end.
A bit like a lease purchase.
Sort of, but structured within Sharia rules. And again, musharaka, both fixed and diminishing, is very applicable for funding and co-owning these large infrastructure projects. It moves away from debt financing towards equity participation.
It really shows the adaptability, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Using these core contracts in different ways.
Absolutely. It provides a robust toolkit for financing major projects ethically.
So one last area. If someone holds one of these franchise rights, exploitation, construction, management, under Sharia rules, is that right itself something they can, sell or transfer? Is it an asset?
Yes, definitely. The standard is clear. A franchise right is considered a financial right.
Okay, a financial right.
And because it's a financial right, it's generally permissible to dispose of it. You can transfer it.
But with conditions, I assume.
Of course. It must be done according to Sharia rules, and crucially, you have to observe any restrictions that the original granting entity, usually the state, might have imposed in the contract.
Makes sense. They might want control over who operates critical infrastructure, for example.
Exactly.
So how can it be disposed of? What are the mechanisms?
Various Sharia-compliant ways. It can be done through a sale, bay, it can be leased ijara to someone else if the terms allow. It can be contributed to a partnership, musharaka.
Okay.
It can even be used as collateral for a mortgage, RON, structured properly, of course. And significantly, these rights can potentially be subject to securitization, TASGIC.
Securitization, like creating bonds based on the franchise rights?
Essentially, yes. Packaging these financial rights into tradable securities, allowing broader investment, it shows how these rights can become liquid assets within the Islamic finance system.
Wow, that really highlights the sophistication. Okay, we have covered a lot of ground today on Sharia Standard number 22.
We certainly have.
From just defining what an Islamic franchise contract even is, its legitimacy, diving into the types exploitation, construction, management, how institutions get involved using things like musharaka and istisna, right down to how these rights can be sold or securitized.
It really does paint a picture of how comprehensive Islamic finance can be, offering detailed frameworks for very modern, complex commercial activities.
And always circling back to those core principles.
Exactly. Fairness, public interest, clear contracts, avoiding prohibited elements. It's a consistent ethical thread.
So what does all this mean for you listening? Well, it shows that even for things like managing natural resources, building huge infrastructure projects, or running essential public services, there are these well-defined Sharia-compliant models available.
Models that inherently aim to embed ethical conduct and societal benefit right into the structure of the deal.
It's definitely a different approach.
It is. And perhaps it leads to a broader question for all of us, regardless of our background. How might understanding these kinds of specific, ethically grounded standards, like Sharia Standard 22, inform wider conversations about ethical business, about sustainable development, and about structuring better public-private partnerships globally?
That is a great thought to ponder. How can these principles inform best practices everywhere?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you feel more informed, maybe had a few aha moments.
Hope it was useful.
Until next time, keep exploring.